Have you ever wondered what a saint sees when he looks at your soul? Not the face you show the world, not the stories you tell yourself, but the actual state of your immortal soul standing naked before God? Throughout the 20th century, millions of people climbed a mountain in southern Italy to kneel in a wooden box before a man who could see exactly that. He saw their lies before they spoke them. He saw their hidden sins from decades past, and sometimes, in the most terrifying moments, he saw where those souls were headed after death. His name was Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, and for 50 years he bled from the wounds of Christ while hearing the confessions of 5 million people. 5 million souls laid bare before a man who could not be deceived. But this story begins long before the crowds, long before the blood, in a farming village so small most maps didn't bother with it. Pietrelcina, southern Italy, 1887. Francesco Forgione was born on May 25th to peasant farmers who owned almost nothing. His father Grazio worked the rocky soil. His mother Maria Giuseppa prayed the rosary while cooking over an open fire. They had 7 children. 2 died as infants. This was normal. Death lived in every house. By age 5, Francesco told his parents he would give his life to God. They believed him. Religious children were common. Children who meant it were rare. Francesco meant it. He began performing private penances, small acts of suffering that no one asked for. He slept on a stone floor. He fasted on feast days. Something was driving him that his parents couldn't name. At 15, he joined the Capuchin order and took the name Pio after Pope Pius I. Pio, a name that meant devoted. He would spend the rest of his life proving it. 1910, he was ordained a priest at age 23. That same year, something happened that he told almost no one about. While praying alone, wounds appeared on his hands and feet. The stigmata, the marks of Christ's crucifixion bleeding from his body. He begged God to take them away. They disappeared. He thought it was over. He was wrong. World War I came. Pio was drafted into the Italian army in 1915 for medical service. His health collapsed almost immediately. Tuberculosis. Fevers that spiked so high, other soldiers thought he would die. He was discharged on March 16, 1918, declared permanently unfit for service. He returned to the Capuchin friary at San Giovanni Rotondo, a village of 6,000 people perched on Mount Gargano, 75 miles north of Bari. 7 friars lived there. The church was nearly empty most days. No one came. There was no reason to come. That was about to change. If you value documented stories of saints and their supernatural experiences like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. And this script is researched and factual, using sources from Bernard Ruffin's definitive biography, Padre Pio. The true story, published through 3 editions with extensive documentation from the archives at San Giovanni Rotondo, and Father Stefano Manelli's first-hand account in Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, written by a man who grew up with Padre Pio as his spiritual director. These sources pull directly from the historical records, witness testimonies under oath for canonization proceedings, and the saint's own letters to his spiritual directors. Now back to the information. August 5th, 1918. Pio was alone in the church, making his thanksgiving after Mass. He felt a pain unlike anything before. A vision of Christ appeared, wounded and bleeding. Christ held a lance. Without speaking, he pierced Pio's left side. The physical wound stayed. Blood seeped through his habit. The pain never fully stopped. This phenomenon, called transverberation, is the mystical piercing of the heart. It indicates a union with God through suffering. Pio lived with this wound for 7 weeks, telling almost no one. September 20th, 1918. Morning. The church was empty. Pio knelt before the crucifix in the choir loft, praying after celebrating Mass. The vision came again. Christ appeared, wounded and suspended. Light streamed from the 5 wounds, 5 rays of burning fire. They struck Pio's hands, his feet, his side. He screamed. No one heard. Blood poured from all 5 points. When he looked down, the wounds were there, raw, open, bleeding. He tried to hide them. He wrapped his hands in cloth. He changed his socks constantly because the blood soaked through. The wounds smelled of roses and flowers, witnesses later testified. The bleeding never stopped. Every day for 50 years, Pio lost about 1 cup of blood from these wounds. Doctors examined them and found no medical explanation. The wounds were perfectly round. They went completely through his hands. They never became infected, despite being open for half a century. By 1919, word spread, a priest in the mountains who bled like Christ. People began to arrive. A few at first, then dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. They came from across Italy, then from across Europe, then from across the world. They came to see the wounds. They came for miracles. They came to confess their sins to a man who they heard could read souls. That last part was true. From 1918 to 1923, Pio heard confessions 15 to 19 hours every single day. 15 to 19 hours. One woman after another, one man after another. 3-minute confessions on average. The numbers are staggering. In 1962 alone, 83,035 women and 19,837 men registered to confess to Padre Pio, an average of 273 people per day. By the time he died, historians estimate he heard approximately 5 million confessions, 5 million souls. The confessional became his battlefield. A German spiritist came to him out of curiosity, intending to confront the priest. The man began, "Look, Father, confession is an excellent pedagogical resource invented by the Catholic Church." Padre Pio cut him off. He began listing the man's sins, one by one, with dates and circumstances the man had never spoken aloud. The spiritist left shaken and converted. A priest traveled a long distance to confess to Pio. After the priest gave his confession, Pio asked, "My son, do you remember anything else?" The priest searched his memory but found nothing. Pio spoke gently. "My son, yesterday when you arrived at 5 a.m. in Bologna, the churches were still closed. Instead of waiting, you decided to go to a hotel to rest before Mass. You lay down in bed and slept so soundly that you only woke up at 3 p.m. The priest had forgotten. Pio had seen it anyway. An Italian marine professional came to confess before deciding whether to move to Australia for work. He prepared well for confession, but when he opened his mouth, no words came out. Pio began speaking for him. "You have sinned in this, and this, and this, and in that." He named 4 major sins the man had tried to hide. The man later testified, "I saw the unknown. I understood what it means to live by faith, to live the life of the Spirit." He stayed in Italy. 6 months later, the exact catastrophes Pio had foreseen occurred, but the man was safe because he had stayed. An Englishwoman came to Pio's confessional. He slid the door shut and said, "I have no time for you." She persevered. For 20 days she returned. For 20 days he refused her in the same harsh way. On the 21st day he consented. He told her, "You are a poor, blind creature. Instead of complaining of my severity, you should ask yourself how the divine compassion can receive you after so many years of sacrilege." She had been receiving communion in mortal sin for years. Pio could see it. He saw that she wasn't truly sorry yet. But he had prayed for her during those 20 days. When he finally absolved her, she was ready. Her soul was restored to grace. She completely rejected her past life. A woman confessed an abortion. Pio refused her absolution, saying, "You're not truly sorry for your sin." She felt rage. She felt grief. But Pio could see the difference between emotional guilt and true contrition. She prayed the rosary for months, offering the mystery of the scourging at the pillar to beg for true sorrow. 1 year later, she returned. This time, Pio absolved her immediately, saying, "Now you are truly sorry. I can give you absolution." This was the pattern. Pio demanded truth. He demanded real conversion. He would not give absolution to anyone who came without repentance. One monk testified that Pio once refused absolution to a penitent and told him, "If you go to confess to another priest to gain absolution, you will go to hell together with him." He was severe with the insincere. He was tender with the broken. Father Pasquale Cattaneo came to confess after preparing thoroughly. As his bus approached San Giovanni Rotondo, he thought to himself, "The spiritual life seems like climbing glass sometimes." When he entered the confessional and finished confessing, Pio smiled at him and said, "So, the spiritual life seems like climbing glass, eh?" Father Pasquale stood speechless. Pio had heard his thoughts. A woman named Alma de Concini was in the church several meters from Pio's confessional. She couldn't speak to him that day, so she prayed interiorly, "Father, send me a blessing. I really need one." The instant she finished the thought, Pio moved from the confessional window, looked directly at her across the room, and made the sign of the cross. Teresa Venezia waited in the corridor after confession, hoping to kiss Pio's stigmatized hand as he passed. He walked by without stopping. She felt sadness and lamented in her heart. Suddenly Pio turned back, walked up to her, held out his hand, and said with a smile, "Go ahead then and kiss it before I give you a little smack." He knew, he always knew. His superiors once asked him about a particular sin that upset him more than others. Pio answered that sins against motherhood, the limitation of families, sins against life, and sexual sins outside marriage troubled him deeply. He forcefully refused absolution to anyone who rejected the begetting of children through contraception. To one person he said, "May the Lord's vengeance not fall upon you." To another he said, "When you married, God made the decision of how many children he ought to give you." Father Stefano Manelli, who knew Pio personally and whose family Pio called "my family," documented these teachings in his biography written from first-hand experience. Pio taught that sexual sin, particularly fornication, was among the mortal sins that most offended God because it violated the sacred purpose of human sexuality within marriage. The Church has always taught that sex outside marriage is a grave sin, and Pio upheld this without compromise. But Pio's gift went beyond reading the living. He saw the dead. More souls from purgatory climbed the mountain to San Giovanni Rotondo than living souls, Pio once said. The dead came to him constantly, begging for prayers, begging for masses, begging for release from their purification. Winter, 1922. Pio sat alone by the fireplace in the guest room after a heavy snowfall. An old man appeared wearing an old-fashioned cloak. Pio asked, "Who are you? What do you want?" The man answered, "Padre Pio, I am Pietro di Mauro, son of Nicola, nicknamed Prococo. I died in this friary on the 18th of September 1908 in room number 4, when it was still a poorhouse. One night while in bed, I fell asleep with a lighted cigar, which set the mattress on fire. I died, suffocated and burned. I'm still in purgatory. I need a holy mass in order to be freed. God permitted me to come and ask for your help." Pio responded, "Rest assured that tomorrow I will celebrate Mass for your liberation." He walked the man to the door. Only then did Pio realize the door was locked. He unlocked it. The moon lit the snow-covered square. When the man vanished from sight, Pio felt faint. He closed the door and stumbled back inside. Days later, Pio and Father Paolino went to the town hall. They searched the vital statistics for 1908. On September 18th of that year, one Pietro di Mauro had died of burns and asphyxiation in room number 4 of the building, exactly as the soul had described. The records confirmed every detail. Another night, Pio was praying alone in the choir. He heard noises near the altar. He called out, "Who is it?" No answer. The sounds continued. He stood and walked toward the altar. In the shadow of the tabernacle lamp, he saw a young friar cleaning. Pio said, "What are you doing in the dark?" The friar answered, "I'm cleaning." Pio asked, "You clean in the dark? Who are you?" The friar said, "I am a Capuchin novice who spends his time of purgatory here. I am in need of prayers." Then he disappeared. Pio immediately began praying for him. Brother Modestino da Pietrelcina, another spiritual son of Pio, went to visit his sick father in Pietrelcina. His father told him he had just returned from confessing to Padre Pio. Brother Modestino asked, "Father, when will we see each other again?" Padre Pio had replied, "We will see each other again in the afterlife. Say hello to our country." That night, the father died of a stroke at midnight. Brother Modestino returned to Pio, grief-stricken. He asked, "Father, is my father in heaven?" Pio answered, "He was the son of guilt. He has to serve his sentence." Modestino understood, purgatory. He asked if he should have Gregorian masses celebrated. Pio said, "If your family is in a position to do it, just say it." Modestino spent months offering every step, every effort, every mortification for his father's soul. After months, Pio called another friar and said, "Tell Brother Modestino that his father is safe. He was saved by his prayers and intentions. Now he is in heaven." Pio saw where souls went. He saw purgatory. He saw those suffering for sins they had confessed, but not fully repented. He saw the weight of every choice, every hidden act, every moment of selfishness or lust or pride, and he told the living what they needed to hear. A devout young woman, one of Pio's spiritual daughters, was engaged to a man who had abandoned the faith. The man mocked Pio, calling him a scam artist, abusing gullible people. But the woman convinced him to attend one of Pio's masses. During the mass, the man turned pale. He whispered, "Does this happen every day?" She said yes, not understanding. He began attending Mass regularly. One day he wept uncontrollably. He had seen 3 crowns of thorns pressed into Pio's skull, piercing the skin, blood streaming down Pio's face. The woman had seen nothing. When she asked Pio in confession if this was real, he confirmed it. "Christ bears the crown of thorns at Mass for the expiation of sinful thoughts," he said. The vision converted the man completely. The couple married and followed Pio's 5-step ladder for sanctification: reception of Holy Communion daily, weekly confession, meditation, examination of conscience, and spiritual reading. This was Pio's method. He called people to holiness through the sacraments, through prayer, through ruthless honesty about their sins. He compared weekly confession to dusting a room. Even if a room is closed, it is necessary to dust it after a week, he said. He lived this himself. From 5 in the morning until late at night, Pio's day was Mass, confession, prayer, and more confession. In his later years, he reduced the confessional hours to 8 per day when he was in his 60s. In 1967, the year before his death at age 81, he still heard confessions from 15,000 women and 10,000 men, 70 people per day. At age 81, the physical cost was immense. He ate 1 small meal per day. He He slept 3 hours per night. The stigmata bled constantly. His body carried the wounds of Christ, while his soul carried the weight of millions of sins brought to him in that wooden box. After long days in the confessional, he once said, "Oh, the souls, if you knew how much they cost." He also said, "The sight of so many souls who wish to justify their evil ways pains me, exhausts my brain, and tears at my heart." But he never stopped. "Before reproaching a soul, I suffer it first," he explained. "But it is not I who act, but he who is in me and above me." The Vatican investigated him twice. In 1924 and again in 1931, church authorities questioned the authenticity of the stigmata. They restricted his ministry. He could not celebrate Mass publicly. He could not hear confessions. He could not give spiritual advice. Pio obeyed in complete silence. He did not complain. He did not defend himself. He submitted. The restrictions were eventually lifted, but for over 2 years, the man who heard 19 hours of confessions per day was forbidden to hear even one. He used the time to pray. Through all of it, his reputation only grew. People came by the thousands, then by the tens of thousands. A ticketing system had to be created just to manage the confessional lines. People waited weeks for their turn. Busloads arrived daily. The little village of San Giovanni Rotondo became one of the most visited pilgrimage sites in the world, second only to Rome. Pio was uncomfortable with fame. He wore mittens to hide the stigmata because he was embarrassed by them. When people crowded him on his way to the altar or confessional, he had to be helped through by his brother friars. He never sought attention. He wanted to suffer in secret, but God had other plans. During World War II, American bombers were ordered to attack San Giovanni Rotondo because it was held by Nazi forces in southern Italy. When the planes appeared over the city and prepared to drop their bombs, a brown-robed friar appeared in the air before the aircraft. All attempts to release the bombs failed. The planes returned to base. Later, after an American air base was established at Foggia, a few miles away, one of the pilots visited the friary. He recognized Padre Pio immediately as the friar who had appeared in the sky that day. Pio had bilocated, appearing in 2 places at once to save the town. Now let's talk about what happened between those confessional hours and that final Mass. Because Pio didn't just hear confessions and bleed. He built something that would outlast him by generations. January 9th, 1940. Pio announced plans for what he called his earthly work. A hospital, not a small clinic. A real hospital with modern equipment and trained doctors and enough beds to serve the entire region. He wanted to build it in San Giovanni Rotondo, a village of 4,000 people with dirt roads and no running water in most homes. People thought he was insane. Construction began in May 1947 with roughly 20 workers, no architectural plans, and 4 million Italian lira in the bank, about $2,400 in today's money, to build a hospital. Padre Pio said, "The work is not mine, but Providence's. If I could, I would build it in gold, because whatever is done for the sick is done for Christ, and nothing can be too good for the Lord." Donations came in small amounts from ordinary people, a widow's coin, a laborer's weekly wage, fishermen sending what they could spare. Pio established prayer groups across the world specifically to support the hospital with their intercessions. He insisted, "Without prayer, our house for the relief of suffering is like a plant without air and sun." The prayer groups became what he called the front line of this little city of charity. The hospital rose slowly, stone by stone, prayer by prayer. Pio named it Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, the home for the relief of suffering. He explained, this work was inspired and created to be a spiritual demonstration of God's love through a call for charity. July 24th, 1954. The first outpatient clinics opened. May 10th, 1956. The hospital welcomed its first patient, 250 beds. Departments for surgery, internal medicine, obstetrics, gynecology, pediatrics, radiology, orthopedics, and a 24-hour emergency room. A small chapel where Pio would pray between confessions. May 5th, 1956. The official inauguration. Thousands attended. Prayer groups from across the world filled the streets. Pio celebrated Mass on the hospital steps, too weak to stand for long, but determined to bless what he had built. He spoke to the crowd, his voice trembling. "A seed has been sown on the earth that God will warm with the rays of his love, a place of prayer and science." 1 year later, he added, "At the Casa, patients, doctors, priests shall be reserves of love, and when it abounds in one, so it shall be passed to all." The Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza has already opened its arms to many thousands of suffering bodies and spirits, offering to all, regardless of status, from the most wealthy to the less well-off, ministering to all in generous measure. Pio gave the hospital to the Holy See, making it one of only 2 hospitals under the direct jurisdiction of the Pope. Pope Pius XII gave Pio special permission in 1957 to not follow his vow of poverty so he could manage the project. The man who slept on a stone floor and ate one meal a day now handled millions in hospital funds. He never kept a cent. Today, Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza has grown to nearly 1,000 beds spread across 26 medical and surgical departments and 14 diagnostic service departments. It handles 60,000 admissions annually and provides over 1.3 million outpatient services each year. It's recognized as one of the most efficient scientific research hospitals in Europe, with partnerships with Harvard University, Oxford, Cambridge, MIT, and research centers across the world. The hospital Pio built with a widow's coins now conducts over 200 clinical trials and publishes cutting-edge medical research. And here's what matters. Every patient who walks through those doors walks through a building that exists because a bleeding priest in a mountain village believed God wanted the sick to be loved, not just treated, loved. Among those who experienced that love firsthand were Giovanni and Paola Siena. 1928. 8-year-old Giovanni Siena received his first Holy Communion from Padre Pio in San Giovanni Rotondo. It was just a moment, a brief encounter. Giovanni didn't think much of it at the time. He grew up, worked in the mines, then became a teacher, then a journalist. Life took him through different paths, but something kept pulling him back to that mountain village. Eventually, Giovanni joined the staff at Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, working at the hospital Pio had built. And there he met Paola. Paola was 21 years old, living in San Giovanni Rotondo, visiting Pio regularly. She suffered from severe depression and serious lung problems that doctors couldn't cure. She went to Pio and begged for his intercession. She testified later that through Pio's prayers, both conditions healed completely. The depression lifted, her lungs cleared, she could breathe. She asked Pio for guidance about her vocation. He told her she was called to marriage. She wondered where she would find the right man. Not long after, she noticed Giovanni. They crossed paths frequently in Pio's circle. After several months, they decided to get engaged. They made a commitment at Pio's instruction to pray together every single day, entrusting their future marriage to God. August 27th, 1950, 5 o'clock in the morning. Pio celebrated the Mass that blessed their marriage. He was moved to tears. At the end of Mass, he turned to them and said 3 times, "Be happy, be happy, be happy." A few months into their marriage, they received devastating news. Paola was infertile. They would never have children. For a couple in 1950 southern Italy, this was not just heartbreaking. It was social death. Childless couples were pitied, whispered about, considered cursed. They went to Pio. He promised to pray the chaplet of the Sacred Heart of Jesus every day for them. This was Pio's favorite prayer of petition, sometimes called the Chaplet of the Sacred Heart, or the Sacred Heart Novena Prayer. Then he smiled at Giovanni and said something that seemed impossible. "You'll see. You'll have as many children as the choirs of angels." Giovanni didn't understand. Angels are organized in 9 choirs according to Catholic tradition. 9 children? How could that be possible when doctors said they couldn't have any? July 24th, 1951. Paola gave birth to a baby girl, but the child immediately fell critically ill. Doctors said she had no chance of survival. Giovanni and Paola brought the dying infant to Pio. He looked at the baby and said calmly, "The child will not die. She will live a long time." Within days, the fever broke. The child recovered completely. This was the first. 8 more followed. 9 children total, just as Pio had prophesied. Giovanni later wrote about all of this in his book, Il mio amico Padre Pio, My Friend Padre Pio. Giovanni and Paola remained close to Pio until his death in 1968. They went to him for confession regularly. They prayed with him. They asked his advice about their marriage, the education of their 9 children, their daily struggles. After 60 years of marriage, Paola said, "I can say that Padre Pio's recipe, the Chaplet of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, works. Giovanni and I love each other as much as on the first day." This is what Pio did. He didn't just tell people about holiness. He walked them through it, marriage by marriage, confession by confession, prayer by prayer, child by child. But not everyone received the gentle treatment Giovanni and Paola experienced. Pio's confessional had another side. A woman came to confession planning to mention eating several figs the night before as the sin of gluttony. Before she could speak, Pio cut her off. "Don't waste my time with figs. Tell me the real sin." She froze. He knew. He always knew. A man entered the confessional and began listing minor faults. Pio interrupted. "You're wasting both our time. I confessed the sin you committed 20 years ago that you've never told anyone." The man broke down weeping and confessed. Another woman approached, nervous and unprepared. Pio slid the confessional window shut before she could speak and said sharply, "Come back when you've examined your conscience properly." I don't have time for people who don't know their own sins. Cleonis Morcaldi's mother died. A month later, Pio told Cleonis, "This morning your mom flew to paradise. I saw her during Mass." The woman had been in purgatory for 1 month, purified by prayer and suffering, then released into the joy of heaven. Pio saw it happen in real time while consecrating the host. This happened constantly. Pio reported to Father Anastasio di Royo that one night he was alone in the choir when he saw a friar cleaning the altar late at night. Pio asked him to go to bed since it was so late. The friar said, "I'm a friar like you. I did my novitiate here, and when I was assigned to take care of the altar, I passed many times in front of the tabernacle without making the proper reverence. Now I must stay in purgatory until I make reparation for my irreverence." The friar explained that he needed prayers. Pio began praying for him immediately. Later, Pio said, "I could have sent him to paradise right away, but instead he had to stay one more night in the flames of purgatory." The choice was Pio's. God had given him that authority. Father Onorato Marcucci helped Pio one night when Pio was ill and couldn't sleep. The next morning, Pio told him, "Last night I was not well and didn't make you sleep. I have been thinking how to compensate you, so I took a plenary indulgence for your mother to send her to paradise." Onorato's mother had died years earlier. She had been in purgatory. Pio released her with a single prayer. December 30th, 1937. Pio was praying in the choir with the other friars. Suddenly he said, "Let's pray for our provincial father, Padre Bernardo Apicella, who is in agony." Nobody knew Father Bernardo was sick. The next day they learned he had suddenly died at the exact moment Pio announced it. Nina Campanili's brother, Pasqualino, died in combat on September 26, 1916. Her mother sent Nina with her teacher, Vitorina Ventrella, to ask Pio if Pasqualino was saved. Pio answered, "Yes, he is saved, but he needs your prayers." Saved meant not in hell, but he still needed purification in purgatory before entering heaven. The pattern repeats through hundreds of documented testimonies. Pio saw the state of every soul, living or dead. He knew where they were. He knew what they needed. And he spent his life giving them what they needed, whether they wanted it or not. Which brings us back to the confessional and the question of sin. Pio was merciless with sexual sin, not because he was prudish or old-fashioned, but because he saw the damage it caused to souls. Father Stefano Manelli documented that among the sins that upset Pio most were sins against motherhood, limitation of families through contraception, abortion, and fornication, which is the biblical term for sex outside marriage. When someone confessed using contraception, Pio often refused absolution on the spot, saying, "May the Lord's vengeance not fall upon you." To another person he said, "When you married, God made the decision of how many children he ought to give you. Who were you to reject his gift?" When women came to confession for abortion, Pio could see immediately whether they carried true sorrow or just emotional guilt. One woman confessed her abortion and Pio refused her absolution, telling her, "You are not truly sorry for your sin." She was enraged. She felt she had suffered enough. But Pio saw deeper. He saw that her sorrow was for herself, not for the child, not for having offended God. She prayed for an entire year, specifically offering the mystery of the scourging at the pillar from the rosary, begging God for true contrition. When she returned a year later and confessed again, Pio absolved her immediately, saying, "Now you are truly sorry. I can give you absolution." This is the distinction most people miss. Feeling bad about sin is not the same as being sorry for sin. Regretting consequences is not the same as repenting of the act. Pio could see the difference. And he would not give absolution until the soul was truly ready to turn away from sin and back toward God. September 22nd, 1968. 50 years to the day after receiving the stigmata. A solemn Mass was celebrated to mark the anniversary. Television crews filmed it. Thousands of pilgrims filled the church and spilled into the square. Pio celebrated the Mass, but he appeared desperately weak. His voice could barely be heard. After the Mass concluded, he nearly collapsed walking down the altar steps. His brothers had to catch him. It was his last Mass. That same evening, he received extreme unction, the sacrament of the sick. Early in the morning of September 23rd, 1968, Pio made his last confession and renewed his Franciscan vows. He held his rosary but was too weak to pray the Hail Marys aloud. He whispered, "Jesu Maria, Jesu Maria, Jesus Mary, Jesus Mary." Around 2:30 in the morning he said, "I see two mothers," believed to mean his own mother and the Virgin Mary. He died whispering, "Maria," with his last breath. The doctor who examined his body immediately after death noticed something. The stigmata had completely healed, no trace, no scar. The wounds that had bled for 50 years had vanished. Only a faint red mark remained on his side, and even that disappeared within hours. Pio's suffering was finished. His funeral was held on September 26, 1968. Over 100,000 people attended. They came from every corner of the earth, rich and poor, educated and illiterate, believers and skeptics. They came because Padre Pio had touched their lives, had seen their souls, had called them back to God when they were lost. Pope Paul VI said of him, "Look what fame Padre Pio had." But why? Because he celebrated Mass humbly, heard confessions from morning till night, and was a visible representative of the stigmata of our Lord. 1999. Pope John Paul II beatified Padre Pio, June 16, 2002. Pope John Paul II canonized Padre Pio before more than 500,000 pilgrims in St. Peter's Square, one of the largest canonization ceremonies in history. In his homily, the Pope said, "The life and mission of Padre Pio testify that difficulties and sorrows, if accepted with love, transform themselves into a privileged journey of holiness." Today, Pio's body lies in a glass tomb in the crypt of the Padre Pio Pilgrimage Church in San Giovanni Rotondo. His face is covered with a silicone mask because of deterioration, but the rest of his body remains remarkably preserved. 20 million people visit each year. They come to pray. They come to ask for intercession. They come because the man who saw souls is now among the saints in heaven, and they believe he still sees them. What did Padre Pio see when he looked at a soul in mortal sin? He saw the wound, not just the act, but the rupture it caused in the relationship between that soul and God. He saw how fornication, the sin of sex outside marriage, tore at the sacred design of human love. He saw how abortion destroyed not just a life, but left a scar on the mother's soul that cried out for healing. He saw how contraception rejected God's gift of life. He saw how sacrilege, receiving communion in mortal sin, was an act of betrayal so deep it required extraordinary grace to overcome. But more than the sin, he saw the person. He saw the brokenness. He saw the fear. He saw the lies people told themselves to justify what they knew was wrong. And he saw the path back. That's why he sometimes refused absolution. Not because he was cruel, but because he loved them too much to let them leave without true conversion. Real sorrow. Real change. He once told a spiritual daughter, "If we put into our confession all our goodwill and we are truly sorry, the Lord forgives everything." But he also said, confession without repentance is a deception of conscience. In essence, a sacrilege. Truth was everything to Pio. You could not lie to him. You could not hide from him. He would see it and name it and demand that you face it. But once you did, once you brought your sins into the light with true contrition, he became the gentlest of fathers. God runs after the most stubborn souls, he said. They cost him too much to abandon them. This is what Padre Pio saw. This is what he lived for. And this is why 5 million people climbed that mountain to kneel in that box. Because in a world full of easy answers and comfortable lies, Padre Pio offered something terrifying and beautiful, the absolute truth about your soul, delivered with the mercy of God and the firmness of a father who would not let you settle for anything less than holiness. The wounds on his hands bled for 50 years, but the wounds he healed in the confessional number in the millions. Every soul he turned back to God. Every person he pulled from the edge of hell, every marriage he saved, every vocation he confirmed, every sin he confronted with love. His final words were not a summary or a teaching, they were a name. Maria, the Mother of God, the woman who stood at the foot of the cross and watched her son bleed for the salvation of the world. Pio spent his life bleeding with Christ. He spent his death calling to Mary. In the archives at San Giovanni Rotondo, there's a record from 1922. Pio told Bishop Alberto Costa and several friars that he had been visited by so many souls from purgatory that they no longer frightened him. He said it matter-of-factly. The dead came to him like the living. They needed prayers. They needed masses. They needed someone who could see them and hear them and help them. And Pio did, until the very end. Until his body gave out, and the stigmata healed, and he whispered the name of the woman who had given birth to the God who marked him.